for our panel discussion, let me point out to you that there are 3 different items on your table that we'd like you to become familiar with, because we'll be talking about them later in the program. Ralph? And this moment gives me a chance to say these things don't happen by accident, so please thank the team of Christina Allen, Kathy Kay, Lydia Linker, and Leah Davis for putting together this program for you.
You know, it's always great to have these gatherings because so many of us are working together so constantly and consistently on these issues that it feels as if we're just gathering for a discussion as compared to gathering for a presentation. You know, a couple things I'd like to say first to start off. First of all, it seems that my whole week has begun in the morning at Lipscomb because of the great things that are happening here. And I really want to say thank you to Randy Lowry and Lipscomb and Conexion and Renata for the opportunity for us to participate and bring this value to the community. So thank you all. I also would like to mention that after Randy speaks, I always feel like I've been to church. And I feel so inspired. And I hate to follow him speaking because he is so effective at communicating an idea in a way that we can all walk away with that idea in mind. And Naki, I just want to say that your presentation this morning reminded me again, after our visit to Toronto, how casually Toronto wears the mantle of its international status. You know, I think one of the great things that occurred as we came back and had discussion about the trip was as people tried to sort of explain and illustrate how being global as a city is so natural to Toronto, it almost doesn't seem like a special topic. It's just a part of the fabric of the community, and you really displayed that this morning. And I also wanted to say that I hadn't heard that we only use 10% of our brain, so I never realized that when people said I only used half of my brain, they were actually complimenting me. You know? So I really appreciate that. I take away a much rosier feeling about myself. You know, this morning we have some great panelists here. We have them from education, conflict resolution, business, to talk a little bit about diversity, inclusion, and how it operates within this community. And I warned them last week when we talked that I might have a curveball or two based on what we've seen in the presentation. And I'm going to throw one right away, right at the beginning. We will talk a little bit about the things we talked about last week. But what I'd really like to do, you look at the title of this gathering, Opening Doors for All. And what's the role of the institutions that you represent? What's the role in opening doors for all? There could be some argument that you don't have to open the doors. The doors are available for everyone to walk through anyway, and that you have to actually make an effort to close the doors. But the question really is, what's your role, your institution's role in opening doors for all? Greg, let's start with you.
Oh, great.
I should introduce everybody, but you see their names.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning. And thank you, Ralph, for the early curveball. Anyway, you know, Greg Garrett, State Farm. You probably see the bio in there. And I think about from a private sector, or better yet, a institution like State Farm. We want to grow in all markets. And I think the role that I play in trying to grow in all markets is helping our leaders understand that all markets are different. And they might not look like the people sitting around the executive table. And so there's a balance of understanding that and an education in understanding that and why that's important, especially for a long-term perspective that we want to remain the #1 property and casualty insurance company in the world or in America. And I think that's important that we help them understand what's going to take, what it's really going to take to do that. And it might mean opening doors for others and building some relationships with some great organizations that I hope I'll get a chance to talk about.
So, Greg, as you interact with other businesses, as you interact with the business community as a whole, how do you feel that the business community in general feels about an obligation to open doors for all?
I can't speak for everyone, but at least the circles that I run in and the companies and the business that I network with, I think it's one that we kind of see it as a business opportunity. Because as we get to this, I tell my leaders all the time, it's not a black thing, it's not a white thing. It really boils down to a green thing. And that's the universal language that people understand, is that capitalism is what drives this great nation of ours. And if you want to grow, sometimes it's going to take you understanding and really looking out and making sure you're sensitive to these other cultures.
So, Tamara, what's your participation in Opening Doors for All?
Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me? My name is Tamara Losell.
Tamara, thank you.
Before I answer your question, we are actually opening doors on a couple different levels. I would just like to take this opportunity. As a mediator, I don't normally talk a lot about myself, but since we're celebrating diversity today, I would like to share with you that I am an embodiment of diversity. My first name is Hebrew, and I'm Jewish. I was born in Jerusalem. My last name is my married name, and it is Tibetan. And my husband is from Tibet. We actually met in Jerusalem at the university there, go figure. And I was raised here in Nashville, so Nashville is my home, and I have dedicated my adult life to helping others feel welcome here, as I actually struggled to feel welcome as a child growing up. The Nashville Conflict Resolution Center is a nonprofit community mediation organization in Nashville. We are one of 13 centers across the state that promotes mediation and offers pro bono or free mediation services for primarily lower income disputants who can't afford attorneys and costly court fees. One of the ways that we're opening doors in Nashville is by creating our bilingual multicultural mediation program, which is one of a kind in the city and also across the state. This sort of leads into the first question that I had on my list, which is how did this all get started? In late 2002, early 2003, which a time that predates my arrival here as the ED, our board and our active mediators were mediating civil disputes in court, and we're starting to see an influx of Latino individuals coming into court who were intimidated by the court system, didn't quite know how to navigate through the court system, and were not receiving help in the court. There was a need for interpreters to assist individuals, litigants in the court, and there was a need for folks to offer an alternative method of dispute resolution, alternative to having a judge dictate decisions. And so my board saw that there was a need to recruit and train bilingual mediators, and that's how our program got started. Actually, the board and the executive director at that time hired an assistant who was a young Latino woman from Puerto Rico, and collectively they worked on developing community forums, essentially outreach programs on Nolensville Road at, what's it called, Aurora Bakery, I think, on Nolensville Road, to attract Latina individuals that might be interested in acquiring mediation skills and working with our agency as pro bono volunteer mediators. And so they facilitated 4 of these forums in 2003, and then collaborated with this university, with the Institute for Conflict Management, and trained a dozen Latino individuals to become these our core group of bilingual mediators. That's how it all got started. Things shifted around a bit in those interim years, and now we have on staff a part-time bilingual mediation coordinator who is essentially running that program. And we have some challenges around retaining mediators, which I'll talk about when you get to my next questions. But our goal, of course, is to increase the availability of mediation training for people that are interested in helping the Latino communities in Nashville resolve conflicts in a manner that is safe, confidential, affordable, accessible, etc. So that's what we're trying to do. And as I said, we're opening the doors on 2 levels. We're doing that in Nashville, where we saw in the courts that there was a real need that was being not unmet by the lack of mediation services for Latinos. And also, we opened a new door across the state in that our mediation center is the only mediation center that has such a program available.
So, since I misspoke Tamara's name, Tani, what would you like to say?
Tani, that's about right. Tony Majors, Metro Public Schools. opening doors really for Metro Public Schools is a reverse design model. K-12 education is already free and appropriate and accessible to all students. So from an education perspective, our job is really to provide equality access and quality programming and quality education for all kids. The purpose of that would be to show kids and make children understand, as well as their families, the value of education. So from an educational perspective, the opening doors is the after effect. We educate and provide quality education, allow students to see that they have the ability and potential to go on and be successful, to open doors for a better life in the future.
Mm-hmm. So, heard yesterday in an education meeting that there are 103 languages spoken in the metro schools, and that this year alone, 9 new languages have entered the schools among students.
That sounds about right, but I have to divert to Miss Libby in the audience to see if my numbers are exactly right. Okay.
That was correct? Okay, good. Thank you for that confirmation. So that obviously that indicates that the schools environment, the education environment from a diverse perspective is changing all of the time. In our schools, how do you manage that kind of change, that kind of volatility or that kind of variability in the school environment and still fulfill that education responsibility?
Well, it is a challenge. As you mentioned, we've had 9 new languages added to our school population this year. My perspective is a little bit different. I'm fortunate. I'm a native of Nashville. So being a native Nashvilleian, I remember what it was like when it was just African Americans integrating the Antiochs and the suburban areas of Nashville. I was also in high school when we had the first round of immigration, which was with an Asian population in South Nashville. So I've seen how that affected schools and how that affected families. As a school administrator at Glencliff High School, I was immersed in diversity. So it was front and center every day. Dr. Lowry mentioned that you challenge the business community to see diversity as a strength. That was actually our motto at Glencliff High School, diversity is our strength. As a school district, we have to recognize that diverse student populations mean that we have to educate a little bit differently. We have to actually let parents know how to support their children in an educational setting. We have to make sure that all of our programs and services are accessible to all students, but also that it's an equitable distribution of programs across our city. We don't want there to be pockets and isolation within our school district. Educating our children, it doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter the language barrier. Our goal is to make sure all of our children receive a quality education and are successful. So as administrators and as school staff, you have to recognize what's needed to engage that child. One of the things that I've really learned is that you have to go beyond engaging the child, however. You have to engage the family. You have to engage the greater community. There's a lot of research out there now that shows that when communities are involved in supporting education and supporting families, that the academic performance of children is greatly increased. So it's a different approach. You're no longer teaching in isolation. Education has become much more of a global perspective. You know, community members, Conexión, other organizations that can play a part in supporting education because that engages the child. And then once the parent and the family understands how to support and value the educational process, the outcomes for the children are greatly increased.
So, Greg, from a business perspective, again, you're approaching a diverse consumer group. You're approaching diverse employee audience. How does your business particularly reach out, connect? How do you guys engage in that kind of outreach to lots of different and diverse communities?
Yeah. You know, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't state at least our mission statement so we can kind of have that as a context. At State Farm, our mission is pretty simple. We strive to help people manage the risk of everyday life, recover from the unexpected, and realize their dreams. So myself, as a D&I leader, that is the strategic filter that we use as we start looking out at the community to figure out where we're trying to help and really grow, but also to help from partnerships like Conexión Americas. We know that there's a newly immigrated customer base or constituent base that they service. And so our investment to Conexión really is probably a long-term strategy to say, hey, we're going to do our part as a corporate citizen to make sure that that we're supporting an organization like Conexión that's very active in the community. And as long as our brand goes along with them, hopefully we'll catch some of the residual effect down the road. And I think that's very important. Another thing that I'd like to mention, too, you know, at State Farm, our diversity strategy is really built around 4 main quadrants. the workplace, the marketplace, the community, and supply diversity. And as we look at that, it gives us a holistic approach, of really, again, another strategic filter as we reach out to the community to see how we're able to accentuate those particular pillars of our strategy.
So Tamara, question 2, what's working, what isn't working?
Okay. Well, partnering with agencies like Conexión Americas, like the Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition, like Catholic Charities, agencies that are actively working with large groups of Latino immigrants, has helped our organization. We're a small grassroots mediation organization, and we have really benefited from receiving referrals to mediate for our bilingual program. So that has really helped us significantly in terms of spreading the word in the community about the benefits of mediation. I also would like to state our mission. Our mission is to provide high-quality and affordable mediation services and conflict resolution education and training. So what we do is recruit diverse community leaders to our mediation trainings, and then at an affordable rate. And our training is at a low cost, so that then we ask those leaders to give back to the community for a year by volunteering in our mediation programs. And we have several mediation programs. Many of them are through the courts, and then some are outside of the court system, like our bilingual program. So what has worked has been partnering with other agencies, larger agencies that are actively servicing the community. Also, what has worked, interestingly, is partnering with agencies that have not yet tapped into this community. And that's because we've created that niche of serving Latino immigrants through the service of bilingual mediation. An example is the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, a state government agency that investigates and pursues claims of employment discrimination and housing discrimination. Currently, they don't have the staff to offer mediation, bilingual mediation to Latino complainants, and so we've contracted with them to handle those mediation cases. So in that instance, partnering with agencies that want to work with the community but haven't yet figured out the structure or have not yet initiated or expanded their services have partnered with us, and that has worked well for us as well. One other thing.
Take it
a
away.
Challenge to our organization, and there are many. A challenge has been, I really want to emphasize this in case there happen to be members of the audience that are interested in mediation, both as a profession and as a public service, giving back to the community, offering an affordable solution to people that are in conflict. And we all know conflict is rampant in life and a natural part of life. One of our main challenges has always been, and particularly in our bilingual program, retaining volunteers. Retaining volunteers. Again, we rely on volunteers to offer bilingual mediation to the Latino community here in Nashville. But oftentimes, folks have a hard time taking time off of work to give their time, their volunteer time, to provide the service. I don't have an answer to that, but that has been a major challenge. So we've worked really hard to make our presence known in the community, and then to offer training and offer scholarships for training and encourage more and more Spanish-speaking individuals to come and become mediators and join this new field, but then retaining the volunteers has been a challenge. And lastly, funding is always a challenge, like all nonprofit agencies. Finding funding for this work has been difficult because I think many funders don't see mediation as an essential service. But we all know when you're embroiled in a conflict, it can be very costly and very taxing on individuals and families and communities to untangle yourself from that. And so we really see that mediation is critical, but it can be a difficult thing to pitch to funders.
You know, when we visited Toronto, we found a culture and a community that really embraced that global diversity very easily and casually, as we mentioned before. Nashville really isn't in that place at this point. It's still a conscious effort, a conscious plan to undertake that, to embrace that diversity. Your institutions, as you interface with a variety of people and in a variety of circumstances, what do you feel that your institutions are doing, and what should institutions like yours, Greg, be doing to encourage the community to embrace this diversity in a more natural way and a more constant way?
Yeah. You know, one of our guiding principles for our D&I strategy has been collaboration. And as we look at the root word of collaboration, it's to co-labor. So it takes a village, and I know that's one of the mantras that I was raised on in my cultural background. But as we look at it and we start working and networking with other organizations like Conexion, but also the YMCA Latino Achievers, it's another one of our partnerships that we encourage the working amongst those organizations together. The Tennessee Latin American Chamber of Commerce, the organization formerly known as, that was a joke, the Tennessee Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We partner with them on a different level, but again, the collaboration of those organizations. And I see a hand popping up back there. Are we ready for that, Ralph?
Not quite yet.
Okay, all right.
You're not off the hook yet.
Okay. But, getting back to the collaboration piece, I think there's so much energy within when folks are able to come together and look at together what we can do that we can't do as an individual. And I think that's where that synergy comes.
Tony, you have an environment that has all of this diversity already blended into it. How does that how do you use that circumstance, or how do you participate in the broader community to project that same kind of environment you're trying to create there?
That's a very broad question.
It is.
And the reason I say that is because from the school district's perspective, there are multiple levels of the ways that the schools can interact with the community. Yes, we are an already very, very diverse school system, but you have initiatives that are driven by school administrators and school-based teams. So you have those school teams working with their population of kids that are projecting out to try and engage their immediate community to meet the needs of that environment. Then you have clusters of schools. Many clusters of schools face very similar issues. So they would do some alignment and some working together and collaborating in order to address the needs within their community, their feeder pattern, because it's very similar children with very similar needs. From the district's perspective, we have a whole school. We have the entire city. There are close to 80,000 kids in Metro Nashville Public Schools, 109 different nationalities, or 103. So from our perspective, we have to provide the structure. How do we allow the different ethnic groups and different organizations that are interested in supporting the educational process, how do we provide a structure for them to function effectively? One of the things that we're working on right now with the new balanced calendar is how to extend the learning environment, extended learning time. It's a high-yield strategy which is already proven to improve or to decrease the achievement gap between subgroups, but also to elevate the achievement levels of all students. We are looking at community-based initiatives and broadening that program and that model next year. There'll be a lot of information coming out within the next few weeks that really discusses the community initiative and how the district is moving forward. So, again, clearly communicating that we value diversity and we value involvement of others, but also providing the structure for those things to take place. And I think the bigger part is making sure that everyone understands that we all play a part. It takes a village scenario. It takes a whole city. It takes much more than a village. Well, we're much larger than a village nowadays. But everyone plays a part. Extended learning outside of traditional school hours, businesses and individual organizations, support groups and nonprofits working to educate our children. That's what we want to project out.
We're about to take questions from the group. I want to say thank you to the panelists for responding to these questions and underline and emphasize one important feature, and that is we live in a global marketplace, and for communities to thrive and prosper going forward, they're going to have to connect to that global marketplace. The advantage of the diversity to us from an economic perspective in Nashville is very strong and very positive, and continuing to encourage that, advocate for it, only creates a greater opportunity for prosperity for all of us. Since 1992, this region's population has grown 60% in the less than 20 years. Much of that population growth has come from international or foreign migration as well as in-migration from across this country. So, as a chamber, we remain committed to encouraging that diversity, and institutions like this and businesses like Greg are helping to create a more casual and natural environment, with Toronto as sort of a goal that we aspire to be. So, questions from this group? There was a hand back here, I think, wasn't there, Greg?
I think so.
Okay.
I got it.
Finger the person. Show.
Hi, my name is Moises. I'm just curious, how private business, like State Farm, assesses the needs and addresses those needs that may not be as profitable as other markets that you're addressing?
Great question. You know, we do a lot of data mining, as I like to call it. We also are very involved with the census. We get data from a company called Claritas. So we're able to see kind of where the population is going. And for those hockey players or hockey fanatics in the room, you guys remember Wayne Gretzky, right? And I will never forget, you know, one of the quotes that kind of resonates with me is that they ran up to him and said, "What makes you so great?" And he said, "I've been fortunate enough to skate to where the puck is going to be." And I think that takes vision, and I think that takes being able to look forward, not just at the current situation where it might be not as profitable, but looking long term to say, okay, what can we do now? The other strategy would be the ostrich strategy, which is to put your head in the sand and just pray that things take care of themselves. And when you raise your head up out of the sand, there's this utopia. We're taking a different approach. We're taking a proactive approach to really try to invest into the community, to help with those profitability issues through education and awareness. And I would also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that we have one of our State Farm agents here, Fernando Arguello, who is actually in Franklin. But Fernando is one of the agents that is very actively involved in the community. He spends time at Conexion. He's doing a presentation tonight at another university. I will not say the name. But he's actually going to be speaking to a group of...
Where's it located? Is it on this boulevard?
Somewhere in this area. But as we think about that, you know, the good neighbor principle that we're trying to instill is to be a good corporate citizen. And it might not be a situation where it's so profitable today where it can be in the future. And we're doing our part to try to make that part through education and awareness.
Okay. Another question, right here.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth West. My question is primarily for you, Tony. With regards to bullying, it's obviously been an issue it's all over the media lately. Recently here in Tennessee, we had a young man who committed suicide as a direct result to some severe bullying in the schools. I'd love to hear what Nashville's doing, specific programs to combat bullying and to really target, you know, as mentioned earlier, changing the behaviors in order to change the attitudes.
Well, one of the things that we've already started working on is developing student leadership. One of the things the research has shown us as well is that when more and more students stand up for the right things and are vocal and address the issue of bullying, that bullying is greatly decreased because it's the ability to immediately address the situation validates that this is not the way we behave in this environment. Through my department, we're actually looking at revising our bullying and harassment policy beginning early next semester, so that we'll have a more streamlined, more supportive code of conduct and disciplinary procedure to address bullying for next school year. We already have many things in place already. We already have student code of conduct that supports and addresses the issues of bullying and harassment. We already have support structures in place within the buildings, whether it be through guidance counselors, STARS, school social workers, or cluster support teams. So we already have multiple support mechanisms in place within our school. What we want to do is strengthen our policy to include and identify the other areas of bullying that are really becoming more prominent in our society. Right now, you see far less face-to-face bullying and harassment, and bullying no longer looks like it did when I was in school. When we were in school, bullies were the big guys, usually the athletes. It was often very heavily racial, based on racial bias. Now bullying takes the face of cyberbullying, text messaging, things that take place behind closed doors and people can assume different identities. That's a much harder issue to address. You do have to evaluate and take into account First Amendment rights, but as a school system, our stance is always very simple. If it has the potential to impact or negatively impact the learning environment, then we can address it from the school's perspective. So, to answer your question.
Other questions? Oh.
Hi, my name is Wendy Thompson. I'm with the Tennessee Board of Regents. It's my experience that in higher education, and I'm going to pick on myself here, places like colleges of business and engineering programs typically will want to say, we have to admit the students with the best scores. And I believe that when corporations like manufacturing mostly, but State Farm might be an example. You mentioned supplier diversity programs. My struggle is I think that higher education is one of your suppliers. And if we could get partnerships with corporations and colleges of businesses, colleges of business to say, we need you to supply diverse employees to us. That might be a more effective way of increasing diversity in the workplace. Because I'm noticing that there are very strong goals in supplier diversity, but human resources, not so much. Could you address that?
Sure. You know, a part of our strategy has been through these relationships that we've built in these communities. One of the I guess the low-hanging fruit, or maybe not, would be that we diversify our candidate pools. And I think that helps HR kind of feel comfortable in that environment, that the things that you're doing in the community should result in referrals to agency recruiters like Jill Spry, raise your hand, who just joined us. You know, it should help us diversify those candidate pools. So now that pool doesn't look as homogeneous as it has been in the past. And some of the results of the efforts that we're doing in the community should diversify that. Now, does that guarantee that a person is going to get hired? It doesn't, but it at least gets them into the pool of the process. And then their merits and their background and things of that nature play into it as well, too. But you're right. I think there could be more that could be done. We're trying to take an approach of, again, being proactive, but also being sincere and making sure that we don't alienate one particular group over another as well. Does that help address that? And if not, let's talk more.
That's the friendly
I'd like to
part
speak
in
to that.
Asheville.
Yeah,
that
that's
response.
right. That's
yeah.
right. That's right.
I'd like to speak to that as well. As a principal, I was fortunate enough to be involved in the Academy's Nashville launch and implementation. From the educational perspective, of course, we would not work with HR departments of corporations. But from the school's perspective, we've recognized the value of education and exposing students to career opportunities and identifying their talents when they enter the high school level at the 9th grade level, and then starting a sequence of programming in the 10th grade. Our goal is to really, number one, increase the rigor of instruction, increase the relevance so students understand the value of education, and then improve the relationships that students have not only with their students, but also with the business community that supports the academy to which they've entered. The long-term goal with that would be education improving the quality of the workforce in our city, the longevity, the improved societal aspect, the better qualified applicant pool. So our goal would be in a few years that you'll see students leaving the high school level, graduating their senior year. Number one, the increased number of students entering college. The mayor is very clear on his belief that increasing the graduation rate from our local colleges has a direct financial benefit to our society. And the second part of that would be by increasing the number of students that are exposed to the career programs at a younger grade, it identifies their talent. All kids have talent. A lot of times they don't have the opportunity to explore it. This gives them an opportunity to explore that talent. Hopefully they will go on to college. Even if they don't go on to college, they've had 3 years of instruction where they're better prepared to enter the workforce. And what we would hope is that the business community would in turn identify those kids that have had that additional training and start them off at more than entry-level pay.
You know, it occurs to me just, Greg, first of all the representatives you brought here this morning, we should be charging you a lot of money to come here and do the kind of business that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing all those representatives. Tony, I did want to ask one last question. Is there another question in the group? Because we're down to our last question. Go ahead. Oh, here comes the microphone.
Here comes the mic.
Nano Sute. My question's for Tony. I was curious to hear what has the reception been from parents from both African American and white students to your efforts to increase or focus a lot of your resources on including diverse students into your education programs?
Early on as a school principal, I did have some initial backlash because we began by doing global trainings and global workshops, where it was just open to anyone that wanted to attend. Unfortunately, they were usually very poorly attended. Then we had a very specific workshop that was only for the Latino community, and we had 500 people show up on a snow day. Well, the backlash that I received was, well, why don't you do this for all the other ethnic groups? My response was, I've done it 5 times, and you didn't show up. So that was the only backlash that I've received. What I find, and this may not be politically correct, I was told years ago as a football coach that young kids will be the generation of children that eliminate racism within our society because they don't function in isolation anymore. Now, we know it does still exist. However, when you look at our kids today, if you walk through the halls of any metro school, you're going to see black kids with white kids, with Asian kids, with African kids, with Arabic kids, with Latino kids. You know, they sit together at lunch. There's not the isolation that used to exist. So when you look from a kid's perspective, there really is no backlash. And the other thing that we do is I don't publicize it as I'm trying to improve quality of education for diverse students. No, I'm trying to improve the quality of education for all kids. We just happen to be a diverse environment. So it's very, very intentional from my perspective. You know, I know that I'm trying to increase opportunities for all students, and I know that we have to do some extra things to really increase the quality of education for some of our subgroup populations. But I never say I'm out to improve this just for Latinos or just for the Africans or just for the Arabics. I'm trying to improve quality programming for all kids. So because of that approach, I really haven't had the backlash that I really expected with some of our initiatives.
Okay, one final comment about our public schools. I don't know if you knew this, but 1/3 of all the English language learners in the state of Tennessee are educated in metro schools from pre-K to 12. 1/3 of all the English language learners. And another thing I want to underline, because you may have recently seen it, you may remember a couple of years ago the graduation rate was 73% from our schools. Then it went to 82% last year, and you may have just recently seen that graduation rate went to 76%. The reality is the performance has improved, but the state has chosen to count a 4-year graduation rate instead of a 5-year graduation rate. So the reality is the graduation rate is improving, and we are lobbying the state to get that 5-year count because of the population of English language learning students. That performance needs to be reflected, and that commitment needs to be reflected in the statistic.
And there's another part of that as well that most people do not realize. The law just changed for this last school year in changing the graduation rate, but for all the previous years, it was legally required that students that qualified for English language learners programs have a 5-year sequence. So metro schools were following the law by putting students in a 5-year sequence based on their need for additional language development. And then when the law changed, of course, we saw a decrease in our graduation rate.
So when you compare against 2 years ago, even now changing the criteria to 4-year graduation, metro schools has improved its graduation rate significantly. So thanks to our panelists, Tony, Tamara, Greg, thank you all. You have their bios. And it is my great pleasure now to bring to the podium, for video entertainment purposes, I think, Will Pettigo. Where is Will? Okay, Will, come on up. Thank you, panelists.
I'm Will Pettigo with Nashville Public Television, so thus I have to have the video piece to play. We'll check that out first, then a few minutes of conversation. In the last 30 years, Nashville, Tennessee has become a destination for immigrants and refugees, but their stories often remain untold.
When we were about to get here, we were provided an orientation. They said, USA, you start again. So it's like we have to start again here.
In 4 documentaries, Nashville Public Television explores the stories of 4 communities, capturing new life in a mid-sized Southern American town.
Often my sisters and I, we joke about it and we say we're the Americans because we're not fully Kurds, we're not fully Americans, and we're in between.
I feel very passionate about Nashville, and when I talk about Nashville, it's like I'm talking about my city.
Each community brings a changing combination of assets and challenges, but they are unified by a common aspiration. They all seek a better life, a permanent solution, and a new home.
But for us, I think we're trying to have some kind of good life at least, because we have struggled a lot to have some good future. So I am looking, just dreaming for something better which can help me to, progress.
New lives and a new identity for Nashville and our next-door neighbors.
if we educate ourselves and our young generation, we can catch up with this fast-moving life in America, which is the final goal. How we can take the positive and drop the negative, and then be part of the community, the big moving community.
Okay, so for folks who aren't familiar with the Next Door Neighbor series, we've tried to bring first-person storytelling from different immigrant and refugee communities in Nashville, and tried to be sort of tell the stories of these different communities from the perspective, solely from the perspective of these communities. When we started this project, there were several. This was sort of a new thing for us. We had. It had come from a non-traditional place as far as starting to tell stories. We had actually learned about Nashville's diversity through our education outreach programs. We were starting to do Ready to Learn with teaching young readers and parents to how to read to their children, and the people that were coming to these events were not what we had expected. So we were seeing a lot of folks from Somalia, from the Kurdish community that were showing up and wanting to learn how to read to their children. And we realized, we've got all of these stories around us that haven't been told, that maybe we don't really know about. And I think in general, people, certainly don't think of Nashville as a place with that either, is an emerging international city that deals with immigration issues. And so we started to both produce these programs and also sort of get an idea of what are the sentiments that are in our city. We had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, lots of different community groups, community leaders, trying to figure out how do we talk about this, how do we approach this, because we didn't know what we were doing either at the beginning. And what we realized is that the conversation around immigration wasn't really a conversation. It was just this sort of a lot of myth, a lot of stereotype, a really inauthentic conversation. And that's because in most of our lives, apart from metro schools, I think, we don't have a lot of chances to just interact on a personal level with different folks in our communities. We kind of live in our own little bubbles. And I think as leaders and service organizations, we also tend to work in our own little bubbles, maybe dealing with the issues that we always face just on a day-to-day basis. And so stepping out of that is a challenge. And of course, with our project, we specifically had to figure out how to do that. So we realized the goal of Next Door Neighbors really did have to be not just about diversity, but really about authenticity. And how do we achieve authenticity in our storytelling? How do we try to tell as many first-person stories as possible? And then once we reach these different communities, how do we sort of branch out into a completely new community and not get bogged down in something that, when someone watches this program, when someone from the Somali community watches this program, they're going to go, you didn't talk to these folks, you only talk to these people, you only talk to this age group. And so we didn't want to have that as an issue. We do know, we always tried to talk to elders. We always tried to talk to young people. We tried to talk to men. We tried to talk to women. We tried to find sources of leadership and community where people came together, which was different for every organization or every group that we focused on. And I will say briefly that we've got 5 programs actually that we've done. We've had some feedback. We posted all these on YouTube. We get to see a lot of information about viewership, where those videos are posted. The Somali program in particular has more views than any other content that we have online at Nashville Public Television. All of the Next Door Neighbors programs are pretty much in the top 10. We have over 30,000 views of the Somali program alone. And when you look at those views, more than half are outside the U.S. And when you look within the U.S., all the different states that have large numbers of viewership are states where Somalis live. So it reflects the diaspora of where Somalis are across the world, which is something we didn't anticipate. Also, we've seen both the Somali program and a program that we did with the Hispanic community posted on Janet Napolitano's blog, the Homeland Security blog, as well as some other, sort of strange places. Kassar Abdullah, who works at Turk, was it the Netherlands or Denmark that did she was on the front of a magazine for Holland. So in some ways, we're getting a little bit more attention. And I think what that means is that, and what I've seen through the folks that we've worked with to try to approach these issues is that we have a lot of good leadership. We have the right ingredients to be sort of an authentic community, to be a leader in sort of how communities can evolve and change and grow. And, what are immigrants and refugees but a very real picture of growth, right? So I think the challenge then becomes, and what we've seen is from Next Door Neighbors, we've really applied this idea of being authentic, of getting outside of our bubble, of approaching things from what we think that the story will be, to really dig into our community and understand how we see these issues. Because if we don't reflect our community, then we're not going to do a good job. If our leadership, if our policies don't reflect our community, we're not going to progress. We're not going to move forward. So all of you are great folks in your own communities to sort of expand and think about how do we achieve authenticity around the issues we face, how do we connect with people, and I guess lastly, this doesn't have to be something really complicated, right? I mean, what we found is that it's those individual relationships, it's those stories, it's the connection that we have to each other that shapes how we view our community. And it's not, then we're not all of a sudden having that conversation about immigration that's not authentic, that's based on myth, that's based on stereotype. And we can sort of, I imagine, make strides that will be, better for our entire community. Because obviously we can't have a policy that affects one group and it's health or whatever, and have the health of our community change. And from a public health policy, we know that doesn't work. And so really, I think this is about the little things, the conversations. If you're a church organization, maybe finding a way to have an interfaith dialogue, to sort of reach out and connect with the folks that are really all Nashvillians. May not be U.S. citizens yet, may not whatever, but we are all Nashvillians. One thing that I'll add is that in trying to achieve that idea of authenticity, we wanted to tell first-person stories. We've realized that we don't have to actually go tell someone else's story anymore. There's technology available. So we've started the Storyteller series in Next Door Neighbors, which is something new, where we are training immigrants and refugees to tell their own stories through simple cameras and editing systems. And we've now got about 35 stories that are pretty awesome. So I would encourage you to visit our website, wnpt.org/nextdoorneighbors. From there, you'll find the Storytellers tab, and we've got some fantastic stories there. For me, this is a real opportunity just to get a sort of an introduction, an idea of, that idea of meeting someone new, and hopefully you can all expand that into your everyday lives, whether it's going to a restaurant or whatever. Those little things, I think, do make a difference. So anyways, I will say that, producing the Next Door Neighbors series has changed the way we think about our community. It's changed the way we address issues. We are applying this now to our Children's Health Crisis series. You may know about that. But it makes a really big difference for us. We're going to be working on graduation issues as well, because we know that while our graduation rates are improving, for foreign-born populations, they're still around 40%, which is not sufficient. And there's numerous challenges to that, but we need to know what those challenges are. So anyways, I'm encouraged by the leadership in Nashville. I'm encouraged by the people that we see working in day-to-day life. We have a good community. We can be leaders. We can continue to progress and sort of welcome this growth and then grow from it. So I'm encouraged where we are today. We're not there yet, but we're moving forward. So.